Tires screamed against hot asphalt. A truck swerved, missed a small girl by inches, and roared off down the highway. She stood frozen in the middle of the road, three smaller sisters screaming behind her. A big man came out of a repair bay fast for his size. Gray beard, thick arms, a leather vest worn soft by years. Folks around there called him Deacon. He scooped the child up and carried all four back to the gravel, his one-eyed dog circling their legs. Then the oldest girl pointed at his forearm at the faded ink and said her mother had the same mark. Deacon went still, because that exact design he had put on the skin of only one woman in his whole life, and she was supposed to be gone. What those four girls led him to that afternoon would break him wide open. Stay right with me. Deacon had not moved that fast in 10 years. His knees told him about it later, but in that 1 second when the truck came screaming and the smallest girl stood there in the road like a fence post, he never felt his knees at all. He felt 40 again. He set the four of them down on the gravel and counted heads. 4. All breathing, all crying, which was fine by him because a crying kid is a living kid. His shepherd, Cinder, pressed up against the littlest one's leg and let her grab a whole fistful of fur, and the old dog just stood there and took it. One eye. He'd lost the other years back and never once complained about it. "You girls lost?" Deacon asked. The oldest wiped her face with the back of her hand. She couldn't have been more than 11, skinny arms, sunburned nose. "We're not lost," she said. "We're looking for a phone. Mama said find a gas station and call." Now Deacon's place wasn't a gas station. It was a repair shop, a low cinder block building off old Route 66 with 2 bays and a hand-painted sign that just said VANCE. He'd bought it cheap, 20 years back when he finally got tired of the road. He fixed trucks and bikes and the occasional busted lawnmower for folks who couldn't afford to drive all the way into Barstow. He kept to himself. That was the whole point of the place. "No gas station out here," he said. "Nearest one's 9 miles. Where's your mama?" The oldest girl's chin started to shake. "Back at the motel. She's sick. She can't get up." She said it plain, the way kids say the biggest things. "She told us to walk to the road and wave down a nice person, but nobody stopped, and then Sonny went in the road." Sonny, that be the little one still hanging off the dog. 4 years old maybe. 2 others stood between, stair-stepped, one about 9, one about 6, all of them with the same dark hair and the same worn-out sandals. Deacon crouched down, his back hollered. He ignored it. "All right," he said. "Nobody's in the road now, you're okay. What are your names?" "June," said the oldest. Then she pointed down the line. "Pearl, Birdie, and that's Sonny." "June," Deacon said. "I'm going to get you all some water and we're going to figure this out. That fair?" June nodded, and that's when she did it. She was looking at his arm while he talked, the way kids look at everything, and her eyes went wide. She reached out and touched the ink on his forearm with one finger, careful, like it might be hot. "You have Mama's bird," she said. Deacon looked down at his own arm like he'd never seen it before, and there it was where it had always been. A little brown wren, wings open, a tiny key held in its feet. Faded now, blue-gray with age, the lines gone soft under 40 years of sun. Nobody in the world had that mark. Nobody. Because he'd drawn it himself, sitting at a kitchen table one night with a homemade gun and a bottle of India ink. And he'd put it on exactly one person before he ever put it on his own arm. "Say that again," he said. His voice came out rougher than he meant. "Mama has that bird," June said. "Right here." She touched the inside of her own forearm. "The little bird with the key. We used to trace it when we were scared. She said it means somebody's always coming back for you." Deacon didn't say anything for a long moment. Cinder looked up at him. The dog knew that stillness. He'd seen it before, the few times something reached all the way down into the old man. Here's the thing you have to understand. Deacon had ridden with the Hells Angels for the better part of 30 years. He'd been a road captain, which meant when the club moved, he led. He'd buried more brothers than he could count on both hands. He'd been shot once, stabbed twice, and he'd broken bones in 11 states. None of that was the thing that stayed with him. The thing that stayed with him was a woman named Lena, who'd loved him for 2 years in the 1980s and then vanished one gray morning without a note, without a word, without so much as a phone number left behind. He'd looked for her. Lord, he'd looked. He'd ridden to every town she'd ever mentioned. He'd asked every person they'd ever known. And he'd come up with exactly nothing, like she'd walked off the edge of the earth. In time, he made himself stop. A man can't spend his whole life chasing a ghost. But he never took the bird off his arm, and he never once thought about putting anybody else's name near it. And now here was a little girl telling him her mama wore the same bird. "How old's your mama?" he asked. June shrugged. "Old. Not as old as you." Deacon almost laughed. "Almost. What's her name?" "Josie," June said. "Josephine when she's mad." Josephine. It hit him somewhere under the ribs, and he didn't know why. Lena's mother had been named Josephine. Lena had told him once, lying in the dark, that if she ever had a girl, she'd name her Josephine after the grandmother who raised her. He'd told her he thought that was a fine name. He'd forgotten he ever knew it. And now it came back all at once, whole, like it had been waiting. "Get in the truck," Deacon said, standing up. "All of you, we're going to see your mama." He grabbed water from the cooler in the bay, handed a bottle to each girl, and loaded them into the crew cab of his old pickup. Cinder jumped up front like he always did. Deacon stood by the open door one more second, staring at nothing, feeling the ground move under him even though he was standing dead still. Then he got in and turned the key. The motel was 6 miles east, one of those crumbling roadside places from the highway's glory days, half the rooms boarded, a busted neon sign that hadn't said vacancy in years. June pointed to the end unit, number 9. The door was propped open with a shoe. Deacon told the girls to wait in the truck. They didn't. Of course they didn't. They spilled out and ran ahead of him, Cinder loping between them, and by the time he got to the door, June was already inside calling out, "Mama, we found a nice man and he has your bird." Deacon stopped in the doorway. The room was small and dim, one bed, a rattling window unit fighting a losing war against the heat. There was a woman in the bed, thin, too thin, dark hair going gray at the parts spread out on the pillow. Her eyes were closed and her breathing was shallow and wrong, a wet catch on every draw. On the nightstand sat a row of orange pill bottles and a glass of water gone warm. He knew, standing there, that she was very sick. You don't ride 30 years and bury as many friends as he had without learning what dying looks like. It has a smell and a sound and a stillness, and this room had all three. "Ma'am," he said, quiet, taking his hat off out of habit he didn't know he still had. The woman's eyes opened, brown, tired. And when they found his face, they went wide, and then they filled, and she said one word that stopped his heart flat. "Cyrus." Nobody had called him Cyrus in 40 years. Nobody living even knew the name. Deacon took one step into the room and then another, and he looked at her, really looked, past the sickness and the gray and the years. And underneath all of it, he saw the face he had been trying to forget since Reagan was president. "Lena," he whispered, but it wasn't Lena. He knew it the second he said it, too young. Lena would be near 70 now, and this woman was maybe 45. It was her face, and it wasn't. And then the woman smiled, a broken little smile, and she said, "No, I'm Josie, I'm her daughter." She swallowed hard. "And I think I'm yours too." The room went silent except for the window unit and the girls whispering by the door. Deacon lowered himself into the chair beside the bed because his legs weren't going to hold him. He set his hat on his knee. Cinder came and lay down across his boots like the old dog understood the whole thing needed pinning to the floor. "Say that slow," Deacon said. And Josie did. She told him her mother left him in the winter of 1985 because she was pregnant and scared, and sure a baby was no life for a road captain who might not come home. She told him Lena went back to family in New Mexico and raised the girl alone, and never told Josie who her father was, only that he was a good and dangerous man with a bird on his arm, and that she'd drawn that same bird on her own daughter's skin the day Josie turned 18 so she'd never feel alone. She told him Lena died 4 years ago, peaceful, in her sleep, and that on her last good day she'd made Josie promise something. "She made me promise to find you," Josie said. "She said she was wrong to run. She said you'd have been good to us. She said when I was strong enough, take the girls and find the man with the bird and tell him." Josie's eyes ran over. "I kept putting it off. I kept thinking there was time. And then I got sick, and there wasn't." Deacon reached out and took her hand. It was so light. His own hand swallowed it. On the inside of her forearm, just where June had said, was the wren. His wren, the tiny key in its feet. Older lines than his own, blue and soft. Somebody had traced his 40-year-old drawing and put it on his daughter's skin, and he had never even known she drew breath. For a while, nobody said anything at all. He just held her hand and looked at the 4 girls by the door, and one by one it landed on him what they were. Not strangers, not lost kids off the highway. His blood, his granddaughters. 4 of them, alive and sunburned and standing in a busted motel room, and he'd nearly lost the littlest one to a truck 20 minutes ago and hadn't even known what he was catching. Josie squeezed his hand, weak as a bird herself. "I'm so glad it was you who stopped," she said. "I'd almost given up on anybody stopping." And for one long, quiet minute, Deacon let himself believe the hard part was over. He'd found them. His girl was found. He sat there in the dim little room holding his daughter's hand with his granddaughters watching and his old dog across his boots, and he thought, all right. Whatever comes, we'll figure it out together now. He even smiled. He picked up the warm glass of water and helped Josie take a sip, steadying her head like you'd steady anything precious. She drank. She lay back. The girls crept closer, and Bertie climbed up onto the foot of the bed, and it felt for that 1 minute like a family that had simply been apart a long time and was now, finally, in one room. That's when the knock came on the door. It wasn't a friendly knock. It was 3 hard raps, official, the kind of knock that has paper behind it. Josie's whole body went rigid. Her hand clamped down on his with a strength that shouldn't have been in her. "Don't let them take my girls," she said. And now there was fear in her voice, real fear, the kind the sickness hadn't put there. "Cyrus, whatever happens, don't let them split them up." The door pushed open. A woman stood there in a county badge and a lanyard, clipboard in hand, and behind her 2 sheriff's deputies. And behind them, hanging back by a dented sedan in the lot, was a man Deacon didn't know yet. A lean man with a shaved head and a cigarette, watching the whole thing with his arms crossed. "Josephine Vance," the county woman said, reading off the board. "I'm with Child and Family Services. We've had a report about the welfare of 4 minors at this address, and I'm afraid I have an emergency order." Just like that, the story changed under Deacon's feet. It wasn't about a bird on an arm anymore. It wasn't about a woman who ran or a love he'd buried. His daughter was dying in a bed, and the state of California was standing in the doorway with a paper that said they could take his granddaughters and scatter them across 4 different homes before the sun went down. And that lean man by the car, the one with the cigarette, was smiling now, like something he'd set in motion had finally arrived. Deacon stood up out of the chair. Slow. He was a big man, and the room seemed to shrink around him, and Cinder rose too, hackles just barely lifting. "Hold on," Deacon said. "Just hold on 1 minute." The county woman, to her credit, didn't flinch. She'd clearly stood in worse doorways than this. "Sir, are you the father?" "I'm their grandfather," Deacon said. And it was the first time in his whole long life he'd ever said that word out loud, and it came out of him like something being born. "Do you have any documentation of that?" He had nothing. No birth certificate, no name on any form, 40 years of not even knowing they existed. He had a bird on his arm and a bird on his daughter's arm and a promise a dying woman had made in New Mexico 4 years ago, in a courtroom that was worth exactly nothing, and he knew it. Behind the deputies, the lean man flicked his cigarette into the gravel. "That's a nice story," he called out. "But those girls are coming with me. I'm their father." Josie made a sound from the bed. "No," she said. "No, Wade, you gave them up, you signed." So that was Wade. Deacon looked at him and read him the way he'd learned to read men in 30 years of standing in bad rooms. Wade had walked out on Josie 3 years back, June told him later, walked out when the money got tight and the diagnosis got scary. But here's the thing. In California, if you're the surviving parent, you get the kids, and if you get the kids, you get the survivor's benefits and whatever the state pays a guardian. Wade had done the math. He'd made the call to the county himself. He'd reported his own dying wife as unfit to punch his ticket to a check. Deacon understood all of it in about 4 seconds, and something in him that had been quiet for 20 years, something he'd hung up with his colors the day he bought the shop, woke all the way up. But he didn't move toward Wade, not yet. He turned to the county woman instead, and he made his voice as level as he could. "Ma'am, that man abandoned these children. My daughter has papers to prove it. He's here for a check, not for these girls. And their mother is right there in that bed, and she doesn't have long. Whatever you have to do today, I'm asking you, don't split them up. Keep them together one more night. Give me 1 day to make some calls." Before I tell you what she said, let me say this to you. If you're still here with me, if this story's got hold of you the way it had hold of me, do me the favor and hit that subscribe button. It helps these stories reach the people who need them. All right, back to the room. The county woman looked at Josie. She looked at the 4 girls who had gathered themselves against the wall like a small flock, June with her arms around all 3 of them. She looked at Wade, who couldn't quite hold her eye. And then she looked at Deacon, the big old biker with the wet eyes, and she made a decision that maybe wasn't strictly by the book. "I can place them together for 72 hours emergency," she said quietly. "With a relative, if the relative can pass a same-day check, that's the most I can do. After that, it's a judge." "Not with him," Wade said, stepping up. "He's a Hell's Angel. Look at him. Look at the vest. You're going to hand 4 little girls to a criminal biker over their own father." And here Deacon did move. Not fast. He turned and faced Wade full on, and the 2 deputies tensed, and Cinder let out one low sound. Deacon didn't raise a hand. He just looked at the man, and when he spoke it was almost gentle. "I've done a lot of things I'm not proud of," Deacon said, "but I never once walked out on my blood. I didn't even know I had blood, and I still never did that. You knew. You knew these girls your whole life, and you signed them away, and now you smell money on a dying woman. So don't you stand in my daughter's doorway and tell anybody what a criminal looks like." He took 1 step closer, and his voice dropped so low only Wade could hear it. "You want to fight me for them, you go right ahead and try. But you look in that bed first, and you tell that woman to her face what you came here for." Wade looked, he couldn't help it. He looked at Josie, and Josie looked back at the man she'd married, and she didn't say anything hateful. She just said, "The girls remember you leaving, Wade. They already know. You can't take that from them, and you can't give it back." And the man broke, not into tears, nothing so clean as that. He just kind of came apart at the seams, the way a bully does when the story he's been telling himself stops holding. He looked at the deputies and he looked at the county woman, and whatever machinery he'd set in motion, he couldn't make himself ride it the rest of the way. "Forget it," he muttered. "Forget the whole thing. They're not worth the paperwork." He turned and walked to his dented car and got in and drove off, gravel spitting, and that was the last any of them ever saw of him. That left the county woman and the deputies and one same-day background check standing between Deacon and his granddaughters. Now, a man who's ridden 30 years has a certain kind of record, and Deacon's was no cleaner than most. But here's the mercy in it. All that trouble was old, decades old, and for 20 quiet years he'd been nothing but the man who fixed the church van for free and pulled tourists out of ditches, and never once raised his voice in town. The county woman ran his name from her car. Whatever came back, it came back old enough and clean enough since, that when she walked back into that room she was holding a different piece of paper. 72 hours, she said. Temporary emergency placement. You keep them fed, you keep them safe. You show up Thursday morning in front of a judge in Barstow with whatever proof of relation you can scrape together, and we'll go from there. She paused. For what it's worth, sir, I hope you scrape up plenty. I've placed a lot of kids in a lot of rooms. I don't see the wrong thing happening here. Deacon signed where she pointed. His hand shook. He hadn't signed anything that mattered in years, but there was still the bed. There was still Josie. The deputies left. The county woman left. And the room got quiet again, and Josie's breathing had gotten worse in just that hour, the way it does at the end when the body's done its work and starts to lay its burdens down. Deacon sent June to the truck for the water cooler and got the girls settled, and then he sat back down in the chair and took his daughter's hand, and he stayed there. He talked to her. He told her about the shop and the desert and about Cinder losing his eye to a coyote and never slowing down. He told her about her mother, the good parts, the 2 years he wouldn't trade for anything. He told her Lena wasn't wrong about him, that he'd have been good to them, and that he was sorry to the bottom of his soul that he never got the chance to try. He told her he'd raise the girls right. He told her that 4 times, because he could see it was the only thing she still needed to hear. And somewhere in the middle of the night, with June asleep against his shoulder and the little ones piled on the bed and Cinder's chin on his boot, Josie stopped fighting for each breath. She just eased. Her hand went soft in his. And Deacon, who had buried more brothers than he could count and never once cried at a graveside, sat in that broken motel room and wept without a sound, so as not to wake the girls, holding the hand of the daughter he'd known for one single day. He didn't let go until the sun came up. They buried Josie 4 days later in a little cemetery outside Barstow, under a mesquite tree where there'd be shade in the afternoons. Deacon paid for it himself. He'd sold a bike he'd been keeping for 20 years, a '48 Panhead he swore he'd never part with, and he parted with it without a second thought, because it turned out there were things he'd been saving it for that he never knew about until that week. The judge on Thursday was an old woman with reading glasses down her nose, and she looked over the top of them at the big biker and the 4 little girls in their clean church clothes, and she asked Deacon why she should hand him permanent guardianship. He didn't have a lawyer. He didn't have a birth certificate. What he had was his forearm and Josie's death certificate, and a photograph June had found in her mother's Bible, an old photo of a young Lena laughing on the back of a motorcycle, and behind her, blurry but unmistakable, a young man with a bird freshly inked on his arm. He rolled up his sleeve and showed the judge the wren. He told her the whole thing plain, the way the girls tell the biggest things. The woman he loved, the one he inked, the daughter he never knew. The promise Lena made, and the promise Josie made, and the one he'd made now to a dying woman in the dark. He said he knew what he looked like. He said he'd been a hard man and done hard things. But he'd never in his life walked away from his own, and he wasn't about to start with the only family he had left. The old judge looked at him a long while. Then she looked at June, who'd stood up without being asked, and June said, "He caught Sonny before the truck. First thing he ever did, he caught us. He's got Mama's bird. That means somebody came back for us." And the judge took her glasses off and set them down, and when she granted him guardianship, her voice wasn't quite steady either. So that's how it happened that an aging Hell's Angel Road captain came to raise 4 little girls off old Route 66. It wasn't easy. Don't let anybody tell you it was easy. There were nightmares, and there were nights the little ones cried for their mama, and there was nothing to do but hold them and let them. There were school clothes and doctor visits, and 100 forms with 100 boxes he'd never had to check before. He learned to braid hair, badly, then better. He learned which one liked her eggs runny and which one wouldn't touch a tomato. His brothers in the club came around, and it turned out a chapter full of grizzled old bikers makes a surprisingly gentle set of uncles, and they built the girls a swing set out behind the shop and taught them to check their own tire pressure and never once said a rough word in front of them. Cinder took to sleeping in the girls' room, moving between the beds all night, one old eye keeping watch. When the shepherd finally passed, 2 winters on, the whole family stood out under the mesquite tree near Josie's stone and buried him there, and the girls cried, and Deacon did too, and nobody was ashamed of it. He kept the shop, kept fixing trucks and bikes and the occasional busted lawnmower. But now there were bicycles leaned against the bay wall and chalk drawings on the concrete and 4 voices calling across the lot, and the hand-painted sign got a fresh coat one spring with a line added underneath the name, VANCE, and below it in June's careful letters, "and girls." On the day June turned 18, she asked him for one thing. She rolled up her sleeve and held out her bare forearm, the inside, right where her mother had worn it, right where her grandmother had drawn it. And Deacon, whose hands weren't as steady as they used to be, sat down at the same kind of kitchen table he'd sat at 40 years before, and he inked the little brown wren, wings open, the tiny key held in its feet. The mark he'd made for one woman and lost, and found again on his daughter's cold arm, and now put onto his granddaughter's warm one with his own 2 hands. "It means somebody's always coming back for you," June said, watching the bird take shape. "That's right," Deacon said. His voice was rough the way it got. "But I'll tell you the part your mama never got to. It doesn't just mean somebody's coming back." He finished the last line, the little key, and wiped it clean, and looked up at the girl who had his eyes and his stubborn chin and a nose that burned in the sun just like her grandmother's. "It means once we find our people, we don't ever run again. Not you, not me, not anybody wearing this bird." Out past the bay doors the highway ran on toward the horizon, the same road he'd chased her mother down 40 years before and come back empty. But he wasn't on it anymore. He was home, in a cinder block shop off Route 66, with 4 girls and a fresh grave under a mesquite tree and a story that had finally, after all those miles, come around and found him. And every so often, when a truck came screaming down that highway too fast, Deacon would look up from his work, count 4 heads in the yard and go still. Not scared, just grateful all the way down, in a way he never once was in 30 years on the road, because he knew now what the bird had always meant. He just never had anybody to come back for, until 4 little girls walked up to his bay in the dust, pointed at his arm, and gave him the whole rest of his life.